Howdy everybody and welcome on board to the first ever Micah Miles Podcast. I'm more than excited to have Arizona Aviator, also known as Matt, on as my first guest. In this podcast, we'll be going over 4 topics all about the airline life. If you guys are new to the channel, my name is Micah. I'm a 14-year-old flight sim enthusiast and a proud member of Southwest Virtual Airlines, with the aspirations of one day becoming a captain for a major US airline. I'm hyped to bring the podcast to a hangar near you. Let's quickly run inside the flight deck, friends. I'm here with someone I've known for around 8 months now. He's someone that I've noticed for being so helpful to others. With that being said, I would like to welcome on board Arizona Aviator. I'm so excited to have him on this podcast with me. He's a great person for the first ever episode. And without further ado, tell the viewers a little bit about yourself.
All right, Micah. Well, how you doing? First of all, I'm Matt. I'm a E175 pilot for a United States-based regional carrier.
I'm doing just well myself. To be in contact with an E175 pilot is something a lot of people desire. With that in mind, it's really nice of you to come out and talk with me on this podcast. We're going to skyrocket into the first topic of the podcast, which is going to be all about the journey to the airlines. This will be a great way to start the podcast, as you can look back on where you were just a few years ago and realize who you are today. The first question is, at what age did you start to have interest in aviation?
I've been pretty interested in aviation about as long as I can remember. I've always had a fascination for airplanes and always wanted to fly them, and eventually I finally did.
I'm super happy it started young for you. I'm sure that had a huge influence on where you are today. The next question we're going to talk about is super special. Was the aspiration to becoming an airline pilot always something in mind?
Growing up, yeah, I would say I've mostly leaned towards wanting to be an airline pilot, primarily just because traveling, I've always had good experiences while flying on the airlines and talking to pilots while growing up. But there's definitely come times where I've considered other pathways, such as cargo or private aviation as well.
Right, yeah, I heard cargo pays pretty well. What's your thoughts on that?
Depends where you go, primarily. Some don't have the best contracts, and some have great contracts.
Right.
Currently in this market, I'm sure you've seen some stuff about some cargo carriers struggling, surprisingly, just because they can't meet that same demand that they had pre and during COVID.
Yeah, that makes sense. COVID had a huge impact on aviation, the whole world, matter of fact. It sucks to see some cargo carriers going down because of COVID, which hurts the industry. What motivated you to becoming a pilot?
Like I said, just growing up, taking family trips on airlines, and I always thought it was cool being in an airplane, surfing on the clouds. I always thought that was pretty neat. And then growing up, I took a EAA Young Eagles flight, which is free of charge. It's there to get people into aviation at a young age and kind of expose them to the GA side of aviation. And I went on one of those flights, and that's how I knew I was hooked. It's what I wanted to do.
I've heard some wonderful things about the Young Eagles program. I'm sure a lot of people out there, including myself, are interested with starting in the Young Eagles program. The way I see it, that's the best path. It's incredible that you came from there as well. Travel, as you stated, is a massive influence, and I couldn't agree more with that opinion. Trips in the summer is something that I look forward to because I get to go visit some of my favorite aircraft and favorite airports. Speaking of airports, have you ever worked at one before?
In fact, I have worked at an airport. I was out on the ramp, pumped gas at an FBO, and it was a great way to network with people and get a feel for the other side of aviation that doesn't necessarily entail airlines, between the private sector, the cargo sector, and even the aerial firefighting sector.
That's good to know. I can only imagine what the experience was like. I heard you talk about an FBO. I'm not familiar with the term FBO, although I've heard it before. I'm sure a lot of people out there have the same question, and if you don't mind, can you explain
Sure,
what an
that's kind
FBO
of
is?
so. FBO is it stands for fixed base operator. It's essentially a way you can look at it is like a terminal, like a passenger airline terminal, but for corporate and GA aircraft. Um, Typically, FBOs, not all of them, but typically they'll have like a lobby with a waiting area, just like a normal terminal would. And some go above and beyond in what they offer, and some are very minimalistic in what they offer. But typically, it entails aircraft services. Sometimes they have a maintenance hangar attached to them. Um, they'll distribute the fuel. Some have de-icing capability. Just basic services that you would typically expect
Right.
on an airline.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like an all-in-one deal. I got it. Would you say FBOs are more exclusive than airport terminals?
Oh, absolutely.
That's something I wanted to talk about because when you think about flying corporate, the word private comes up to mind. Having an exclusive terminal-esque to yourself is very important.
And you mentioned the word private, and I would say FBOs are very good at catering to private. Now, some, like I said, some more than others. You'll see the big names like Millionaire or Signature or Atlantic. They typically have more exclusive access for passengers and pilots who are going through the FBO. But there are small FBOs as well that are very self-serve-esque in their nature, when it comes to just, we have a coffee machine and a vending machine inside and then a couch to
Right.
sit on, and that's about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Hey man, that can get the job done sometimes.
You better believe it.
Yeah. So I kind of like that question about talking about working at an airport, and I think that can kind of have an impact on our next question that we're going to talk about. The next question is extremely strong. What advice would you give to younger pilots such as myself?
Well, advice can come in all sorts of different ways and cater to all sorts of different people. And it kind of depends on what advice you're really looking for, whether it's financial or a game plan on getting your ratings. I mean, there's so many avenues. So maybe narrow it down a little bit on what you're looking for.
I've been able to embrace the financial aspect of aviation. With that being said, a game plan to receiving my ratings would be something I would like to talk about.
Sure. So getting your ratings is obviously going to be in conjunction with the financial aspect pretty daunting. It's a lot to go through. It's a lot of training. It's a lot of studying. But most importantly, it's about being fully committed to the training itself. And that's probably one of the biggest pieces of advice for someone starting out is I would wait until you are able to complete your full PPL or at least solo before you even start your PPL. Primarily because if you can flight train more than once a week, hell, even more than twice a week if you can, it's only going to benefit you when it comes to your proficiency. And that's a pretty big aspect in flight training. It prevents a lot of regression in training, and that will save you money and save you time in the long run. Now, I'm not saying don't go fly if you're not able to, if you're not, say, of age to get your private pilot or solo even, but if you have the means to, go for it. Otherwise, definitely wait until you're in a position where you can dedicate a large amount of time to getting your ratings as quickly and as affordably as possible. And this will also work in conjunction with show up prepared. Study the night before, know what you're going to go into the next day. And again, that's going to help prevent a lot of regression.
Yeah, for sure. I really do appreciate you helping, me and many others with, motivation and game plans is what we look forward to. We need to kind of know what we're getting ourselves into. And so people like you and other pilots out there helping, many young aviation enthusiasts get started is very key. And I would agree. And I know you talked about money and time, and I think those two go hand in hand. And would you say time is money in this industry? Would you agree with that statement?
Oh, absolutely. That's in fact, that's an understatement in this industry. And you'll see that a lot. We'll get into it later, of course, but there's different avenues of getting your ratings. Um, some people might see one way more beneficial than another, but really, the sooner you can get your ratings done without any check ride failures, um, and the more cost efficiently you can do it, the better off you're going to be. You can think of it this way: what might be a 1 year delay getting your license now, that could be $500,000 down the road in your career in just 1 year. So
Right.
time is money. Time is money.
For sure. Thanks for relating to that topic. We're going to jump on to topic number two. Topic number one was heat. Thank you so much for answering all of those great questions. You were awesome. We have three more topics to talk about in this podcast. Topic number two is going to be all things progression. Essentially, we're going to talk about the middle of the road. And most importantly, we're going to talk about your most important college year, which obviously is your freshman year. That freshman year really does mean a lot. The first question we're going to be taking off with is: did you go to college? Obviously, we can't talk about your freshman year if you didn't go to college. And is college necessary to becoming an airline pilot?
So, like I said, there's a lot of different avenues to getting your ratings. College is one of them. And yes, I did go to college. Um, is it necessary to become an airline pilot these days? Not as much as when I first went into flight training. Back when I started flight training, most major airlines were setting a requirement for a college degree or military experience. So that kind of solidified my decision to go to college over just doing a more private route of getting my ratings. But nowadays, most airlines are just putting out the colleges preferred. Granted, when the market gets tough like it's beginning to now, obviously having a leg up with a college degree, whether it's beneficial or not, is going to help you in the end make yourself more marketable. But yeah, I mean, I went to college. It was working so far, I suppose.
Yeah, it sure is working for you right now. Why aren't airlines requiring college anymore? I know that's something that changed rather recently.
Yeah, so that primarily stemmed off the FO shortage, which was pretty prevalent kind of after Roni Baloney started. And that's essentially after they furloughed, and then it was hard for them to recapture flight first officers. So a lot of airlines started dropping the college requirement and just making it a college degree is preferred instead of a requirement, just to potentially open up the door to people who previously did not qualify based off that qualification specifically.
Gotcha. So it's just to help with fulfilling that FO role in the flight deck.
Right. Yep.
Gotcha. Thank you for answering that. I know a lot of people out there have asked me that question, and I'm like, I'm no help for you. I'm not even in high school yet, so I appreciate you for answering that as someone that's been through college and knows why these airlines aren't really requiring college anymore. I think college is ideal. I mean, me personally, I would love to go to college. I think that's going to be a great experience, and like you were talking about, I'm going to try and get every single edge I can possibly get to becoming an airline pilot. I need it all, and I think college is where it's at. And speaking of college, how did you make your college selection? Because I know this is really hard. There's many great aviation programs out there, and I think narrowing it down to just one college is something that's rather challenging. And so I want to know how that process was for you, and how did you make your college selection?
Yeah, so luckily for me, my selection was rather simple in the fact that it boiled down to financials. Um, the university I went to offered me the most in scholarships and opportunities for further scholarships, therefore cutting down tuition fees and whatnot. They also had a pretty large flight department, so I knew I would be able to fly. And they offered me to start in a summer session prior to my first fall semester, so I actually started right out of high school. I went pretty much straight to college without much of a summer break. But that's pretty much what boiled it down for me specifically were financials, and it was also close to home.
Yeah, it seems like everything kind of narrows down to money once again, and so it's like be prepared. Know what you're getting yourself into, and that goes back to the game plan that we talked about. It's like how to get your ratings, and I think once again it boils back down to financials. Whether you want to talk about that or not, that's something that everyone's gonna have to face. So, like I said before, just be prepared. Be prepared. Make sure you got some money in the pocket. Um, I know you talked about you jumping straight into college after high school and not having a summer break. What did you do over the summer that could have influenced your college experience? That you just didn't get the opportunity to do because you didn't have much of a summer break.
Well, of course, it was a sacrificial thing. I'm sacrificing spending time with friends and family over that summer before I left my town where I grew up.
Got you.
Um, so, that is in the balance, but I wanted to get started. I wanted to get ahead of the game as much as I could because, like I said, time is money and money is time.
Sure.
So it was more beneficial than detrimental for me.
Sweet. Thanks so much for touching on that topic. And at the end of your freshman year of college, how many hours did you have in the skies?
That's a great question. By the time I was done with my freshman year, I was starting my instrument rating. I think I was already pushing over. I'd say it's probably around 100 hours, give or take.
Not too shabby.
Yeah, don't have an exact number for you, but it's an estimate.
Yeah, no worries. No worries, not a problem at all. It's just whatever we can get. And we're gonna go back and talk about your freshman year one last time. So, what was your freshman year daily habit pattern? Because I think habits are really helpful, to be honest with you, when it comes to getting through college. Of course, you want to embrace the college experience, and you want to enjoy all there is when it comes to college. But you also, have a greater purpose. That vision of becoming an airline pilot, I'm sure, is so major that you don't want to goof around, and you want to have habits. You want to have certain tips and tricks up your sleeve that can help you get through all of your classes and benefit you in the long run and get you some more flight hours. So, what was your freshman year daily habit pattern, if you had one, of course?
I would say it's a strange one to answer. Like many people, my freshman year was more of a rocky start. It was it's tough to adjust to the new way of life. You're not living at home anymore. You may or may not be working a job on the side while you're trying to go through college and things of that nature. Um,
Right, that must be
so
tough.
yeah, so it was tough to acclimate. It takes some time, but once I really got into the flow, it was pretty much just wake up. I had a morning flight block, so I flew in the morning. It was like 5 a.m. or something like that.
Sure.
And that usually went till about 10 or so, and then the rest of the day it would be a class or two after. Some days I didn't have a class, which I would use those days to study or go out and clear my head and go hang out with friends, do whatever.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. Great answer to that, Matt. That was a great answer. And I think habits are everything. And the fact that you had a routine, um, I'm sure was extremely clutch and helped you a lot when it comes to your progression through college. What were the costs associated with receiving your private pilot's license?
The cost for a private pilot license, it's pretty variable. Just like I said, depending which route you take. Um, Mine specifically is probably anywhere between 10 and 15,000, and that's kind of what you can expect to pay at most places, give or take. But it will also boil down to how you are as a student. the more training you need, or the more repeated training you need. And it's, you're paying by the hour, or technically by the minute.
Right.
Um, rather by every 6 minutes. It's 0.1 of an hour. So, if you think every 6 minutes you're paying $12, that adds up. If you got to repeat a unit and go fly again and got to do another hour and a half, well, there goes another 100, $200, just like that.
Right, and then we jump all the way back to time is money again. So it's just like aviation is all corresponding. It all links back up, which I think is honestly beneficial. I think it's pretty cool. Um, and I appreciate you for sharing with us, because that can definitely be a touchy topic when it comes to cost. I think um, personally, I've heard people complain about the cost. I've heard it be up to shoot $30,000, and so the fact that you got it for 10 to 15,000, I think, man, that's a steal. But if you're talking about how it's pretty average and that's what you can expect, I mean, man, I am in luck, because the costs that I've heard from other people are outrageous. So that's definitely relieving news.
Well, I'll pile on to that. You
Go for
know,
it.
there's a lot of factors that go into that cost, between where you're doing your flight training. There's also, you have to break down the costs. Like, how much are you paying per hour for the aircraft? How much are you paying per hour for fuel? How much are you paying per hour for the instructor? Um, and I've heard a lot of flight schools anymore being between 150 and $200 an hour in a 172 for just basic flight training. So, you got to factor that in. And when you factor in that it could take anywhere between like 40 and 60 hours to get your
Yeah.
rating, you can kind of do some rough estimation math by doing that. Um, so you can get a general idea. But all I could say is the cost of everything is going up, obviously,
Yeah.
and aviation is by no means an exception to that. Instructors are wanting more money, so you have to pay more money in that front, and then gas prices are going up, so you pay more for that.
Yeah.
And the price of aircraft, a brand new 172, that's $500,000 out the door.
Yeah.
So you're it gets expensive when it comes down to that stuff. So you got to really look into what is your flight school charging per hour. Try to get a breakdown or a cost analysis of what are they exactly charging per hour, because most schools are quick to just give you an estimate, like, oh, we can do it at 10,000 or we can do it at 15,000. Well, what does that really entail? So you got to do a little self research on that, and kind of dig into the numbers.
Yeah. And I know you talked about the cost of a brand new Cessna 172. What was the cost of a Cessna 172 back when you were first starting aviation, when you were jumping in that aircraft at flight school?
Well, I'm not that old, so it was probably about 450 to 475. Um, Granted, I was training in 172s that were still rather new, and in the aviation world, very new, within 10 to 15 years old. So they were pretty expensive still.
Living that luxury.
Glass
Um,
cockpits, man.
there you go. Um, at one point were you ever a CFI? Because you talked a little bit about, these instructors wanting to pay more. And so that's a great way to build your hours, at least from what I've heard, and also a great way to build that cash. So at what point were you ever a CFI, certified flight instructor?
I was actually never a CFI. I built all my time flying survey. So I never attained a CFI rating of any nature. It was something I was going to do, but decided against it last minute.
Gotcha. So I've never heard flying survey. I don't know what that is. So can you elaborate a little bit more on what flying survey is?
Yeah, sure. So without getting in too much into the weeds with it, essentially we're flying multi-million-dollar cameras in the back of an airplane with a hole cut in the floor. And they're taking pictures or shooting lasers, and we're getting topographical or geometric ortho imagery to make maps. And essentially, those maps are used by, well, just about everyone you can think of under the sun, whether it's insurance companies or Apple, Google, Bing, um, oil companies, coal mines, state governments, the U.S. government, cities. Everyone uses these maps and this data.
There you go.
Yeah. So at one point, I was flying for some mapping under the Bing franchise. Well, not necessarily for Bing directly, but they were a client.
Big deal.
And
Let's go.
yeah, yeah. So it's something to think about. You fly Microsoft Flight Sim, and
Yeah, shout out Bing.
yeah, well, I might have taken some of those
Yeah,
pictures.
there you go. The reason why we have such a great game is because of Matt. Everyone, please thank him in the comments. Um,
I wouldn't go that far,
yes, jokes, friends.
but
And you talked about paying for your aircraft, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be, you buying an aircraft. You don't need to own an aircraft, but just you got to have an aircraft in your possession somehow, whether that's renting it or purchasing it, right? So, what was the first aircraft you ever owned, if you ever owned an aircraft? I don't think you have. I think you rented some aircraft, right?
yes, I primarily built my initial hours through either flying with a friend or renting, or just the hours I built through flight training itself, which is effectively renting an aircraft.
Right, flying with friends is where it's at.
Oh yeah, yeah, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, some kind people in the world. Alrighty, that sums up topic number 2. So far, I am liking what I'm seeing. We've had some great conversations, some great questions, and some wonderful answers. So we're gonna jump into topic number 3. We briefly talked about the airlines somewhat in topic number 1, about the journey to the airlines, and now we're going to talk about the airlines in particular. So we're going to go over some of the goods, some of the bads, some of Matt's personal favorites when it comes to his flights, and some things that he likes to do in flight to help himself out. This next question is a major question, but it's more of a general question, so Matt, you can answer it how you would like. But what are the pros and cons of being an airline pilot?
Pros and cons. Well, it's like most things, it's very subjective. Um, you can kind of tailor the airline life to how you want it, but that's also based largely on seniority within the airline. Some pros. Well, the money right now is great. I know I talk a lot about the money and the financials, but paying back flight school, that's going to be a big burden, and making the money we make now, it makes it that much easier to do so. So that's a nice thing, and most airlines have improved their contracts, so quality of life has gone up tremendously. Cons, there's still going to be quality of life issues that you'll face, whether it's not getting the schedule you want or being on reserve, things of that nature that a lot of people just aren't going to particularly enjoy. Some might, but most probably will despise it after some time.
Right. I think you hit it on the head there. And you talked a little bit about some different career choices when it comes to being in the airlines. You also talked about being on reserve. Now, I'm not sure if many people out there know what that means, but I'm sure many people in the comments will have a question for you. And that question would be, what does it mean to fly on reserve?
Well, you can kind of think of it as being like in the reserves in the military. You're kind of on standby in case you're needed. Um, and most airlines will have their own little way of doing it, primarily contractually based on what they can and can't do to you, and how they can put you on reserve and how long you're on reserve and things like that. But primarily you're there as a backup. Say someone calls in sick, you might get called in off reserve and to fly that trip because that pilot just called out sick who is a line holder.
Oh, interesting. So you got to be on your toes.
Yeah, that's
Gotcha.
a way to put it.
Yeah. And you talked about like what the airlines can and can't do to you, to be honest with you. I mean, that's like a serious thing you got to talk about. So I'm sure you would know, but like what are the rest requirements for a pilot on reserve?
Well, that depends on the type of reserve that you're on, or that your airline allows you to be on, or that you bid on, and you got assigned, or rather awarded based on seniority. Most airlines are going to have something like a 2-hour call out window. When you're on this 2-hour call out window, typically it's between a certain allotted amount of time. So maybe you're on a 12-hour quote unquote shift, say just like 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., for example. Um, Technically, during a reserve period like that, you're not subject to a duty day limitation, so to speak, because you're not on duty. So they can call you at 9:59 and hey, we got some flying for you at 11 p.m. There you go, you're flying, or rather, probably closer to midnight,
Right.
contractually speaking. But
How was the interviewing process to choosing your regional? Because there's a few out there, and to be honest with you, most of the major ones are great. There had to be something that stood out to you about your current regional. So how was the interviewing process?
I'd say all the interviews I went through were pretty quick and straightforward. Again, primarily because I got in when there was an FO shortage, rather the tail end of the FO shortage. So that allowed for the interview process to be tailored to their demands. And to be quite frank, they were much simpler than what they were prior to the FO shortage, or probably even now. Um, I'd say most interviews were probably 15 to 20 minutes at the most, and it was primarily just
Interesting.
covering, yeah, is primarily just looking at my logbook, making sure I qualified for the position, asking some generic IFR based questions, reading a Jeppesen approach or departure or a sit or a star, showing that I can read the plate, showing that I know what the plate is, what a SID, what a star is,
Yeah.
IFR alternate minimums for 121,
So
123
pretty,
rule. Yeah, it was pretty simple, I would say.
yeah, simplistic questions, yeah. And you got that advantage of going in well. They were, I guess, in need of some pilots. So I'm sure that helped you out.
Yeah, so I will caveat with saying, your experience will vary, and especially with things slowing down now, it's going to be much more difficult to get in, and those interviews might be much more difficult to get through.
Right, yeah. Because when the airlines have the advantage, they're going to make sure that you're a qualified pilot, I mean, to the T. And so, yeah, the experience or the interview process definitely will change. And I kind of see the vision on that when I see what you're talking about. I see what you're going with. So, I like talking about the pros and cons of being an airline pilot, and then you talked about some of the pros, and that would be traveling. I think traveling is awesome. And so, what so far has been your favorite destination?
I do enjoy going to like Jacksonville was pretty nice hotel. Savannah was a nice overnight, but I don't know. I don't really have a specific favorite destination.
What was the hardest approach you've ever flown? I'm sure you've been down to Mexico, and Mexico, down there in Mexico they have lots of challenging approaches just due to the terrain. But what has been your hardest approach you've ever flown before?
The hardest approach, some of the approaches into LaGuardia, like the RNAV X-ray 3-1, that's a difficult one.
Yes, there you
Um,
go.
yeah, primarily because it's LNAV only, so you don't get vertical guidance out of it officially. So, yeah, it can be difficult. A lot of those approaches are hand flown up there. Typically, you're used to doing like coupled approaches or having the option to be a coupled approach, or just having full lateral and vertical guidance. But um, LaGuardia's got some challenging ones for sure. Mexico, like you mentioned, that's its own beast. There's a lot of weird nuances going down in there, whether it's speed restrictions at different altitudes compared to the US, where it's just a hard set 250 at 10. Mexico, they might have a 250 at 16,000 or 200 at 13,000, something along those lines, just
Yeah.
dependent on where you are from a VOR, for example. Um, One of the most fun ones I've done is going into Zihuatanejo, which is on the west coast of Mexico. Arriving from the east, you pretty much drop down right over the mountains and then land on a coastline. It's really beautiful. It's like flying into Jurassic Park with
Oh,
how
that's
tropical and
amazing.
mountainous it is. Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous, but um, it's definitely got its own challenges with it. Managing your speed and your altitude at the same time.
Deal one to Neho. What a tricky one that is. But yeah, I'm glad you had a good experience down there. That's great. And yeah, like I was talking about, just the terrain I think has a huge factor when it comes to Mexico. Those mountains that you'll get, and then you'll get the mountains, and then a few seconds later you can look to the left or right and you just see like the coast, and it's just like, oh my gosh, embrace this. These are amazing. I've never been to Mexico personally, but from one of my recent flight sim experiences, man, it is a beauty. I like it a lot. And then
Yeah.
LaGuardia is another thing, right? Because you're right next to Canada. The traffic levels are ridiculous, and so when you're shooting that RNAV X-ray into 3-1, that is a beastly approach. So I'm glad you enjoy that one, because man, that is serious.
Yeah, we'll
Um,
throw in there too. Going into LaGuardia, one of the fun things you get to do is if they're landing to the southwest and it's clear enough, oftentimes they'll send you up the Hudson visually. So they'll give you a visual clearance to fly the Hudson northbound, and you're essentially just buzzing Manhattan in the skyline at 3 or 4 thousand feet, and then they'll vector you in for a base to final. It's
yeah,
it's
that's
pretty
awesome.
yeah, it's pretty cool to do that.
Yeah, quick flex right there, man. But
Yeah. You get to
seriously,
see
you
the
deserve it.
Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island, and right out the window is like the One World Trade Center and all that.
Yeah,
So it's
it's
pretty
awesome.
cool.
Real nice. And so talking about like traffic levels, because we briefly kind of touched on Kennedy because there's just a ton of traffic there. If you have any, what are some strategies that you use to manage stress in flight, or some tactics that you might use to help yourself out, just to kind of calm yourself? I mean, we were talking about the views there, so that might just be one thing. Just kind of give yourself a look out the window and be like, oh shoot, like look at that, that looks just like looks so cool, and I'm sure that helps you out. But what are some things that you do to kind of calm yourself down, kind of just give yourself a moment to kind of recircle things and get focused?
Well, this is going to boil down to essentially what I mentioned when you're going through flight training. Be prepared. And sometimes you're flying a short flight like DC to New York. You're not looking at a whole lot of time in the air in general. Typically, you take off and then you join the arrival. That's about all you get. So, one of the best things you can do is, especially on shorter flights like that, is be prepared for what you're about to get yourself into. Know that it's going to be busy. So before you even take off, you're briefing the arrival. Sometimes you're even briefing an approach before you even take off, just to at least have something in your mind of what to expect. Now, things do change. It's aviation, it's weather based. So sometimes you'll get a runway swap 3 times while you're on the arrival, but
Yeah, nothing's guaranteed.
yeah, but at least you're going in knowing what to expect. You're making backup plans. How long do I have to hold? When am I going to divert if I need to? Things like that you don't have to think about as much in the air as opposed to trying to do it all in the air. Um, Especially on a short flight like that, it's going to help you leaps and bounds be ready for any potential issues.
Yeah, I know you talked about just like briefing the approach, and I don't know if this is something that you do on all your flights, but I'm sure you do it on the shorter ones. Do you throw in your performance numbers for approach while you're on the ground at your origin or departure airport, or is that something you have to like completely run through at cruise? Because that honestly might suck on those shorter flights that you were talking about, DC to you know up to New York. I mean, shoot, you don't got much time in the air to you know stop and throw in all of your performance numbers. Of course, it will help when you have someone next to you. But is that something you do? You throw in all of your numbers on the ground, or do you do that at while you're on approach or in the air?
So per our company manuals, typically we're doing that in the air. And I will caveat that with that's the nice part about having a multi-person crew is you got one person focusing on all the flying, and then one person who can run performance numbers, for example, and talk on the radios. So you kind of get that level of CRM going, where you're working as a team. You're both getting ready to fly into the mess, basically.
Yeah. Definitely helps when you have someone in the flight deck with you. Shout out Rachel from Southwest Virtual Airlines, always a huge help.
Yeah, go Rachel.
What are your current goals? I mean, this is like a hammerhead question right here. I mean, this is like something that a lot of people are interested because, I mean, shoot, we're all rooting for you, Matt, and so I think we all want the best for you. Certainly, I do. That's for sure. And what are some goals of yours? I know you've talked to me before on like wanting to fly the 787, and so is that a true goal of yours? And maybe talk a little bit more about that. What are some other goals that you have, maybe short term or long term? What are some goals of yours when it comes to flying for the airlines?
Well, I will say my goals have been shifting, especially as of lately with hiring slowdowns that have been occurring. It just kind of opens up your eyes to different avenues to potentially getting where you want to be, or maybe just something new altogether long term. And for me specifically, yeah, I'd love to fly wide body internationally. I just think that would be really awesome. Um, but I'm not 100% opposed to staying in a domestic operation, for example, Southwest, because they have a pretty good quality of life over there as well. Um, something you start thinking about, especially as you get older, is not necessarily the big shiny jet, but how's your quality of life going to be? How much are you going to be home? Um, you start taking into consideration some of those aspects. It starts to kind of shift your perception on what you want to do. But currently, I'm thinking about going potentially to the cargo side. We'll see what happens with that. But I still have that goal deep in my heart that I'd love to fly a 777 or a 78 across the pond at least once in my life.
Yeah, imagine how cool that would be. Talk of the town, most definitely. Like, oh man, I know his 787 pilot. He just got done flying from freaking Newark to London Heathrow. Man, how cool is that? That's something, all right. So we'll go over to topic number 4. This is going to be the last topic of the podcast. It's been a great podcast so far, but this is something that really will catch the eye of some of the younger aviation enthusiasts. I think this is going to be motivation to start now. You want to get into aviation as soon as you possibly can. Of course, take it at your own pace. I don't want to rush you, and nobody's going to want to rush you. Of course, it's your career, it's your life, so you do as you please. But I've definitely heard some suggestions from corporate pilots and other pilots as well, just talking about wanting to get into aviation super quickly. So, topic number 4, advantages. So this is going to be huge for, yes, pilots as myself that need all the resources we can get so we can have the best of luck when it comes to the hiring process and one day becoming an airline pilot. And so the first question is going to be a huge question, and that question is going to be, what resources did you use before becoming an airline pilot?
I'm sure it's fairly obvious that I've dabbled in flight sim a bit. That was primarily a resource that I've utilized going through training. And when I say training, I specify that just through my ratings, PPL, instrument, etc. So flight sim is a big one, and primarily vatsim is another great resource to utilize that really prepares you for the road ahead.
Yeah, vatsim's clutch. You got to use vatsim. It's like you can't pass over that option unless you get banned, of course, which that's a major joke right there. You can't get banned off of vatsim.
Yeah,
That
well,
just
that
can't
sounds like a
happen.
you problem.
Yeah, right. Personal issue there. um, See, friends, just goes to show airline pilots aren't so serious after all. People like Matt really do help out the airline pilots, give them a good reputation, good luck. They got some humor in them. He's a good person to talk to, friends, if you ever get the opportunity to talk to Matt. But he's pretty busy, so who knows. What's so important about the VATSIM network? Because that's just a great follow-up question right there as we talk about, VATSIM and what it has to do with, your success. But what's so important about VATSIM? Like the communications, or is it, the community? What is it that just has VATSIM being at the top of your list?
Well, I will start with saying I have a slight bias towards vatsim, primarily because that's really the only network I've ever used when it comes to flight sim ATC sort of things. So I will say there's a bit of preferential bias there. I'm not necessarily experienced with any of the other networks or offerings, whether it's the AI ATCs or what have you. But vatsim itself, it's a great resource primarily because of what you can gain out of it when it comes to communicating with controllers. Um, I've kind of dabbled in the vatsim controller aspect training wise, kind of understanding what they're going through, and all I could say is they go by the real book, the FAA 7110, or otherwise known as the Bible. When it comes to air traffic control, they will teach you everything. When I say you, I'm implying controllers. They're teaching controllers everything about what it is to be an air traffic controller, an effective air traffic controller, and how to basically abide by the real ATC regulations that you're going to experience in the FAA airspace. So when it boils down to it, preparing for real world flying, vatsim is a great resource because you're going to go into real world flying after flying on vatsim pretty much knowing exactly what they're going to say. Whether you're flying traffic patterns or flying IFR in a jet, it's basically the same stuff as the real world as it is on vatsim. So that's why I think it's such an invaluable resource. Really, it's free to use. On the caveat that you're not a goofball and you get yourself kicked off the network, but yeah, having that free resource to use while you're flying in the sim and really brushing up on your ATC communications, that's going to be a huge milestone that you're going to knock out within your flight training in general.
Yeah, it's great to see vatsim caring so much about, younger pilots because, you know, vatsim is, as, we just talked about, a huge resource. So vatsim taking it to a whole extra level. They, put so much into the realism of it. And yeah, like you were talking about it, they take it straight from, the real world. And I think that's awesome. Really, really nice. And I think vatsim does a great job. That human aspect of not always being perfect is something that you're gonna experience that in the real world. You're most likely gonna have to ask a controller one time. I'm sure you've done it before. Hey, I didn't get that. Can you repeat? Or hey, I didn't fully understand. Is there a way you can kind of retranslate that or something along those lines? Because with Beyond ATC, or any other AI ATC software out there, there is no messing up. There is no non-perfection, and that is just something that once again cannot be beat.
Yeah, and that's definitely a real aspect as well. Is sometimes you need to ask someone to slow down on the radios and kind of improve what they're saying, their dialect and what they're saying to you. That's definitely a real aspect of both VATSIM and real world aviation when it comes to flying internationally.
Yeah, well, Matt, that is going to do it for today's podcast. I would just like to thank you now that you're in the call with me for once again your time. As you're nothing short than just a great person. You help me and many others out. And it's not just me, but you are very helpful around the flight sim community, aviation community, more or less. And so I really do appreciate your time because there's a lot of things that you can be doing right now, but you're spending it with me and you're talking with me and you're giving me loads of help, which I appreciate so much. And I'm always grateful for every opportunity I get to communicate with you. And I thank you once more for showing out this podcast. I think it was fantastic and a great podcast to start the Micah Miles series. I'm honestly so honored to have you as my first guest, and I am so glad you were able to be here with me. So thank you once more.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an absolute pleasure being here. And I will say, if people have questions in the comments section, I'll do my best to take a look at it every now and then and try to answer what I can. Or who knows, maybe a part two to this is in the future to answer any other questions that might arise.
Yes, a part two may be coming. I'm sure everyone has great questions in the comments, and that's really respectful of you, Matt, to check out the comments once in a while here and there to give these people what they want. And yeah, I mean, shoot, if you guys are having so many questions where we just can't cover them all, then yeah, a new podcast might be coming out in the near future. And until I see you again, Mr. Matt, have a great rest of your night, and thank you for your time. Well, friends, with the first podcast in the past, I would like to thank you all for your time. I appreciate you guys watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comments below. Also, don't forget to hit that like button. That's a huge way of showing your support. Keep those wings level, fly high, remain airborne in the skies, and I hope to catch you all in my next live.